You should I hide it? Mhm. Morning, everyone. How are we doing? We're doing good. Cold, clammy, sweaty. I am. Okay, welcome to our final presentation. It's not working. I got it. Okay, we're good. We're back on. Hello, everyone. We are Deerfield River Valley Rise, or Resilience in Shifting Environments. My name is Julia Opal, and on behalf of our studio, I would like to thank you for taking the time to join us today. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge our responsibility as planners to engage meaningfully with direct descendants of people who have been violently displaced through the colonial process and had their lifeways interrupted, as clearly laid out in the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, our own AICP Code of Ethics, and Vermont's stated commitment to the truth and reconciliation process. This slide illustrates our study area and the ancestral land of the Wabanakieck Nation. In their own words, for the Wabanakieck, Indakina is not a metaphor or a concept on a map. In our language, Indakina means our earth, our world, our soil. It refers to our unceded ancestral homelands, where our stories are rooted and where our people have lived since time immemorial. Indakina is written into our language in a way that ensures that we cannot disconnect from the land nor our responsibilities towards it. We are a river people. Our territories are fluid and informed by waterways, geology, and movements of wildlife and seasons. The floodplains and river valleys in the region you now call southern Vermont were part of these cycles, connected to a wider network stretching from the southern boundary of Indakina up through the northern hunting grounds in modern Quebec. The Connecticut River Valley was a crucial route through the western portion of Indakina, a highway of water connecting villages and seasonal sites. The four towns of your study lie within the territories and the travel corridors where the band known as the Sokoki maintained villages. Rivers and wetlands were floodways, floodplains were fertile areas used to grow crops and to establish hunting camps and living spaces. For many Abenaki today, it is a dream to return to canoe the roots of our ancestors, but in many places the stream is limited by the physical reality of altered flows. Indakina means a network of relationships rather than a set of hard lines. And these full statements are available to you on your seat. They're also on posters in the back of the room. There will be a final report on our website along with a full-length interview on Abenaki land and culture. I would like to bring us back to our midterm presentation, which feels very long ago. And to the question at the heart of our work this semester in Southern Vermont. What does it mean to live with water? In the Deerfield River Valley, that question is a part of daily life, as the Deerfield River watershed has shaped and connected a vibrant and beautiful landscape steeped in a rich history, but has also brought incredible destruction. Dover, Reedsboro, Whitingham, and Wilmington are small and deeply connected to their landscape, but they are also increasingly vulnerable to impacts from climate change. Flooding from major storms, aging and exposed infrastructure, limited municipal capacity, and ongoing economic and demographic shifts all create challenges that are difficult for these towns to address alone. Our goal this semester is to support Deerfield River Valley in thriving, not just living, with water. We are the UMass Amherst Regional Planning Studio, and over the past 4 months, we've been working closely with our client, the Wyndham Regional Commission to support these 4 towns in the Deerfield River Valley. Our studio was invited by WRC to take a comprehensive, future-oriented look at living with water. That goal was not only to understand current flood risk, but to explore how uncertainties like population change, funding constraints, climate impacts, and economic pressures might shape the future of these communities. Our mission, which has guided every step of our work, is to help these 4 towns adapt to climate change and mitigate flood risk by creating equitable and lasting tools that connect public concern with meaningful analysis. This means grounding our recommendations in local knowledge and regional data and in a real understanding of how residents experience flooding today and how it could change in the future. We wanted to build something that recognizes the uniqueness of each town while still identifying opportunities where working together regionally can make everyone more resilient. This slide is a snapshot of our journey over the semester. We started with early data collection and background research, followed by a phase of extensive community engagement and stakeholder interviews. Mid-semester, we shifted into scenario development, using what we learned from interviews and public engagement activities to refine our scenarios. The final phase has been synthesizing all of that into concrete deliverables, tools, recommendations, and insights that support long-term resiliency planning. So the process has been iterative, grounded in research, and shaped directly by what we heard from communities. Before we could explore the future, we needed to fully understand the present. Environmentally, the physical landscape is a major driver of vulnerability. Steep slopes, narrow valleys, and saturated soils accelerate runoff and intensify flooding. The flow of water will always shift and change landscapes, but climate change exacerbates the force and frequency of that change. Looking at historical FEMA data alone does not convey the extent to which flooding occurs. When we overlay rivers, streams, and tributaries, we are able to understand why these communities continue to experience severe flood impacts. This network of flowing water combined with soil types and elevation produce a landscape that is extremely vulnerable to climate-driven flooding. This landscape impacts infrastructure in the region, contributing to compounded vulnerabilities. As you can see pictured here, inundation flooding, land subsidence, and fluvial erosion forcefully reshape these communities, coming with high costs for repair and recovery and disrupting the social fabric of the region. Our socioeconomic dashboard, which is available on our website, captures the conditions that exacerbate vulnerabilities to flooding in these 4 communities. As this graph shows, many of these towns are experiencing aging populations, indicating that younger people do not feel able to stay and build their lives here. This contributes to a shrinking workforce and strained essential services. As shown in the midterm, Vermont has seen the highest home value appreciation of any state in the country, and towns like Reedsboro, Dover, Whitingham, and Wilmington are no exception. As this graph indicates, there is a growing gap between home values and income, which represents more than just an economic trend. It's a social vulnerability. These patterns make the region sensitive not only to disasters, but also to broader social and economic drivers. Integrated with what we heard from residents, there is a need for improved access to healthcare, affordable housing, more opportunities for young people, support for schools within the communities, and effective municipal governance. Flood resilience can not only be addressed through changes in the built environment. It requires a set of policies and actions that also address these underlying pressures that impact people's daily lives. With that foundation, we used exploratory scenario planning as our core analytical framework for this studio. Scenario planning is an important framework as it allows us to contend with uncertainty and consider possible futures. It is not about predicting the future, but rather grappling with the many drivers that are outside our control and finding actions that will help us achieve the best possible outcome, regardless of what the future holds. First, we developed our initial drafts identifying key drivers, some of which you can see here: demographic change, economic shifts, state and federal funding, housing pressures, and the scale and frequency of climate-driven floods. We refined the scenarios repeatedly, particularly after interviews with municipal leaders and our mid-semester presentation. Their feedback pushed us to sharpen the narratives, clarify assumptions, and ensure each scenario reflected real tensions and choices that these towns may face. Lastly, these scenarios enabled us to test the impactfulness of our deliverables across varied futures to ensure that our work was both rigorous and grounded. Our finalized scenarios are private paradise, rural regression, and green growth. Let me take some time to illustrate them for you now. Private paradise is a future with strict environmental protection, but very limited public funding. Wealthy second homeowners dominate the housing market, economy, and culture, pushing long-term residents out. Infrastructure improves unevenly based on private dollars rather than public needs. This creates an environmentally conscious yet socially inequitable landscape. Think of places like Provincetown or Jackson Hole. Beautiful, but increasingly inequitable. Rural regression is the low support, low regulation future. Populations shrink, infrastructure deteriorates, and both funding and workforce capacity decline. With no FEMA buyouts or insurance subsidies, flood recovery becomes fragmented and slow. Communities rely on grassroots actions and low-cost strategies because formal systems can no longer provide what's needed. And finally, in green growth, we imagined a boomtown future where the 4 towns receive strong government financial support to match proactive regulation for an aggressive green transition in Vermont, leading to demographic and economic growth. Floodplain areas are expanded and affected homes can receive buyout funds. An influx of outside funding for infrastructure upgrades and repairs and funding for disaster relief lead to the implementation of flood mitigation strategies and smart growth. This scenario represents a future in which resources, leadership, and community willpower converge to create a resilient and adaptive Deerfield River Valley. With these scenarios in mind, I would like to move into our public engagement, where some scenario planning directly shaped our approach. We started with a clear engagement timeline, beginning with tabling events and surveys and evolving toward more interactive activities like mapping and games, which you can see in the back. We integrated scenario planning into our engagement in 3 main ways: as a lens for uncertainty, the helping communities think about multiple futures, as a tool for conversation, connecting long-term choices to everyday experiences, and as a structure for input, aligning stakeholder priorities with scenario impacts. Our multi-pronged public engagement included a survey, on-the-ground fieldwork, tabling, a board game, and stakeholder interviews. We advertised our community survey online at all the events we attended and used it during our on-the-ground fieldwork to meet residents in their everyday lives and get their perspectives in familiar settings. Throughout our presentation today, you will see quotes from some of our 52 respondents, and some of them are already on the walls, so you might have read them already. We had many opportunities to table at events in the 4 towns, where we used a mapping exercise with residents to understand community assets and risks. Those are those maps behind you. Around Halloween, we were able to dress up for 2 trunk or treats where we used a banking game to understand what kids think their communities need more of. From investment in roads, schools, grocery stores, and playgrounds, it was important for us to understand what is important to the future of Southern Vermont. Our board game, Ready or Not the Climate Change Challenge, was a key part of our engagement. After many rounds of revision, including a final game with our friends at Wilmington Works, we are happy to present this game as a final deliverable. This game allows participants to conceptualize future uncertainties and explore how regional cooperation can support resiliency. We hope this will serve as a lasting tool that brings people together and sparks creative thinking. Lastly, stakeholder interviews were critical to our scenario planning process. By engaging with a wide range of stakeholders with unique perspectives and expertise, we were able to refine our work and create deliverables that can address the needs of municipal staff, residents, and underrepresented communities. This kind of relationship building is essential for resiliency planning, and we hope that you all can continue to build relationships across communities to create a stronger region. What we heard from residents in Dover, Reedsboro, Wilmington, and Whitingham directly informed our deliverables. Today, my colleagues will present in more detail our 4 deliverables that we believe will enable flood resiliency in the Deerfield River Valley. The Municipal and Regional Capacity Toolkit provides a set of land use policy recommendations to support proactive planning for flooding. The Community Floodproofing Toolkit provides residents with resources to prepare and protect themselves, their homes, and communities from future flooding. Our Resilient Funding Guide has a consolidated guide of federal and state grants, but given shifting federal funding, it also contains a set of resilient financial tools and funding opportunities that will strengthen municipal budgets and help towns invest in a flood-ready future. And lastly, our process-based education materials include our board game, our mapping activity, which will help foster community connection and continued collaboration across age groups and communities. As a part of scenario planning, components from these deliverables were tested against indicators generated by community feedback. This process allowed us to prioritize our recommendations based on impact across all scenarios. By accounting for uncertainty in this way, we are able to ensure that our deliverables are effective regardless what the future brings. My lovely colleague, Anthony, will expand on our scoring process later in the presentation, but at this time, I'm going to pass this along to my also lovely colleague, Seth, who's going to take us through the Municipal and Regional Capacity Toolkit from the Community Flood. Absolutely.
Thank you, Julia, for setting the stage to discuss our deliverables, and thank you all for attending our presentation today. We turn now to our Municipal and Regional Capacity Toolkit. This toolkit is specifically catered to leaders who hold the power and opportunity to make high-impact regulatory decisions, such as town administrators, select boards, and planning commissioners. As our work this semester revealed, planning for flood resilience is not just about rebuilding when the next disaster comes, but requires a comprehensive evaluation of the many elements that impact and are impacted by flooding, everything from drainage culverts to the local knitting club. The Municipal and Regional Capacity Toolkit identifies critical levers for action and builds a scenario-based framework for implementation. Flood resilience is, above all, an issue of land use. When we consider the steps each town can take to live prosperously with water, part of the solution is simple: move out of harm's way. Though seemingly mundane, land use regulations like zoning provide critical levers to guiding communities towards a more flood resilient form. These critical levers also provide a means to streamline land use decisions according to best practice and local context, thus driving capacity for each of the 4 towns. We based our land use recommendations off of 2 SWOT analyses performed at the town and regional levels. A SWOT analysis is a strategic planning tool that identifies internal strengths and weaknesses and external opportunities and threats to a system or policy. Our first SWOT analysis looked extensively at each town's land use regulations and assessed their performance in mitigating flood impact. Our analysis directly focused on core pillars of land use regulation and planning at the town level, including hazard mitigation plans, zoning ordinances, and comprehensive town plans. Mitigation, however, is only one chapter of the 4 towns' flood resilience story. As FEMA faces existential threats, the responsibility for flood response and recovery is more on the 4 towns than ever before. To measure each town's capacity and needs, we also analyzed systems for disaster response and recovery. Our SWOT analysis took a look at each town's municipal regulations and policies relating to disaster response, emergency response resources, and critical infrastructure in times of disaster. Across the 2 SWOT analyses, we identified strengths by asking what regulations, resources, or strategies make for effective flood mitigation and response. We identified weaknesses by asking what gaps or limitations hindered the ability to prevent and manage flood disasters effectively. We identified opportunities by asking what new initiatives could improve flood preparedness and recovery. And lastly, we identified threats by asking what risks or challenges could negatively impact flood mitigation and response efforts. The big picture findings from our SWOT analyses reiterated a directive we've heard repeated time and time again this fall by both our clients and our collaborators. The towns are strongest when they collaborate regionally. Each town shined when their regulations built enduring channels for operational cohesion within their borders, with neighboring towns, and the region as a whole. There is also a tremendous opportunity in each town and across the region to install land use regulations and plans that streamline development towards a flood resilient form and embraces a greater regional vision. On a similar note, the 4 towns should capitalize upon forthcoming state regulation as opportunities, not impediments. The heart of the Municipal Capacity Toolkit is our land use and policy recommendations. These are flexible, incremental actions that are adaptable to the circumstances of varying futures, including changes in financial, regulatory, and demographic trends. Starting with zoning, zoning lays the groundwork for determining how a community looks, feels, and changes through time. Zoning ordinances must strike a balance between accommodating present needs and instituting future vision. Our zoning recommendations are organized in tables by town and address distinct challenges and opportunities that are uniquely experienced by each of the 4 communities. It is worth noting, however, that while a municipality's zoning regulations end at its borders, its rivers do not. If we apply Wendell Berry's adage, do unto those downstream as you would have those upstream do unto you, to town zoning, we can seriously move the needle towards regional flood resilience. To do so, our zoning recommendations pinpoint definitive opportunities for the 4 towns to build cohesion between their ordinances and work towards a regional vision. Crosstown zoning will not only advance regional flood mitigation, but it should also expedite solutions to the current housing crisis, promote conservation, and streamline smart infrastructure investments. All of our recommendations are direct and definitive, providing model language that each town can take home and directly implement. To imagine change, in the late 1800s, only 30% of southern Vermont was forested. Today, approximately 80% of southern Vermont's land is covered by healthy, vibrant forests. While great strides have been made, we unfortunately cannot share a similar success story about the area's rivers. Southern Vermont's rich natural amenities are a wellspring of pride for the 4 towns. A conservation ethic is deeply ingrained within the identity of these communities. Our recommendations represent a targeted and strategic integration of conservation efforts with flood resilience plans. Moving forward, culverts are the workhorse of flood management, directing water away from critical infrastructure and protecting communities from costly damages during major flooding events. Yet, at peak performance, they are intended to go unnoticed. While our opportunities to assess local culvert conditions in the 4 towns were limited, our culvert recommendations provide a thorough review of best practices. At a time when money is very tight and full replacements are very expensive, our recommendations also include an adaptive prioritization strategy for maintaining, upgrading, and even abandoning culverts, both at the municipal and regional levels. And speaking of culverts, the 4 towns need to reassess how they manage stormwater. As the map on the previous slide showed, for the size and population of Dover, Reedsboro, Whitingham, and Wilmington, each town is fortunately home to very strong stormwater management systems. Unfortunately, given the amount of water that has dropped in recent flooding events, the question is not how much water a strong system can take, but how much water any system can take. Though their system's capacities punch well above their weight, so do their expenses. A stormwater utility assessment would create a conversation around the many contributing factors to stormwater. It would also identify, educate, and incentivize each community to pursue active stormwater mitigation efforts. Vermont's Emergency Relief and Assistance Fund supplements federal aid for disaster response and recovery, and has historically provided a strong backbone of funding for past floods. Like FEMA, the future of Vermont's emergency response assistance funding is uncertain. However, the measures recommended by the incentive program are practical and smart. Towns must be very intentional in their decision to commit to these measures, as the outcomes of their investments vary widely in their payoff. Our recommendations comprehensively weigh these factors and offer tested pathways for using ERAF measures to strengthen local flood resilience. And finally, the Flood Ready checklist takes what we learned from our SWOT analyses and translates our recommendations into a simple checklist that municipalities can use to increase their flood resilience. This checklist can be used as a starting point to evaluate your town's capacity to respond to and protect from floods. Municipal staff can use this checklist to prioritize actions in their path towards flood resilience, unlocking funding avenues as they go. We turn now to our next deliverable, the Community Flood Proofing Toolkit. As Julia discussed earlier, community buy-in is a crucial step in a community's path from preparation to action towards flood resilience. Engaging the community in policy change can be a daunting task. Our Community Flood Proofing Toolkit is designed to make that process easier. This toolkit includes educational materials and tools that can be distributed directly to residents to help them increase their homes and businesses' flood resilience. The Guide of Community Level Actions is a starter guide designed to educate the general public about the importance and effectiveness of land use policies that municipalities can use to mitigate flood risk. The guide can be used to inform presentations to the general public or as a standalone handout distributed on a town's website or at a public meeting. The guide aims to ease fears of regulation and restrictions by explaining the importance of planning strategically to minimize the impacts of flood damage. It answers the questions: how can regulatory tools help increase our flood resilience? And how does foregoing development rights in at-risk areas help our community's well-being and our own well-being in the long run? This guide educates residents on time-worn practices of resilient land use regulation that will drive positive planning outcomes well into the future, independent of external forces and events. With resident support, the implementation of flood-resilient zoning and building codes can be expedited, setting communities on a fast track towards a flood-safe future. Next, the growing intensity of floods has shaken southern Vermont's assumptions of what is safe and what is at risk from floods. For long-term residents, it was once precautious enough to avoid the Deerfield River on rainy days. Now, unprecedented precipitation amounts mean the smallest of streams have the potential to do serious damage. There is a dire need to redefine flood risk in these 4 towns. The Flood Risk Mapping Tool is an interactive online map that residents and town leaders can use to identify flood risk down to the parcel level. Simply type in an address, and the tool should visualize a flood risk index score for the given parcel of land. The tool aggregates multiple types of flood resilience data in layers on an interactive map. It combines and synthesizes critical hydrological layers like land cover, soil type, slope, height above nearest drainage, and proximity to the floodplain. The interactive map uses this data to determine a flood risk score for each parcel. Municipal staff can use this tool in their educational efforts with residents, allowing them to provide personalized flood vulnerability data for each property owner. The design of the map tool also allows for easy updates as new data is released in the future, thus providing a critical educational tool for many years to come. By answering the fundamental question of where development is most safe from the risk of flooding, the flood risk mapping tool will serve as the foundation for a future development roadmap. We plan to work on this throughout the winter and are very eager to see its results. Finally, building on the information in the Guide of Community Level Actions and the Mapping Flood Risk tool, the Residential Flood Guide walks property owners through steps they can take to increase the flood resilience of their homes or businesses. The guide is presented as 6 numbered sections that explore actions homeowners can take, from learning about their property's flood risk, to flood-proofing their home and yard, to preparing for the day of a flood event. This is a robust tool because these steps can be active in reducing flood damage regardless of the presence of FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program and state ERAF funds. These are steps that homeowners can actively take at any time and at any pace to build up their home's flood resilience. While these recommendations have been tested rigorously and we are confident that they will produce a high impact, I'm sure you all are wondering, where does the money come from to pay for all this? To discuss this, I will now pass the mic off to my lovely colleague, Liana, to answer this question.
Second. Thank you, Seth. The Residential Flood Guide is a strong starting point for residents to deepen their understanding of the risks of flooding and their responsibilities when it comes to building resilience in their homes. However, that is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The larger challenge lies at the municipal level, where towns must plan to strengthen infrastructure against flooding, support their community, and prepare for disaster recovery. In order to achieve these goals, towns need money. This is where our Resilient Funding Guide can help. Resilience at the municipal level ultimately depends on whether towns can access the funding that they need. Vermont and its towns have historically relied on federal dollars for mitigation efforts, emergency response, and long-term recovery. Last year, the amount of federal disaster aid Vermont received was equivalent to 90% of their reserve fund. If that federal funding had been unavailable, Vermont would have had to use almost all of their reserve fund to recover from the disaster. As federal aid sources are becoming unstable, we cannot afford to only plan for futures where federal funding is available. In 2 of our 3 scenarios, FEMA funding is restricted. We thought that ignoring this potential future would be unacceptably risky. Given these changes to FEMA, other sources of funding to support mitigation and adaptation will become central to the success of planning efforts for these 4 communities. For small towns with limited staff capacity, it can be overwhelming to sort through the plethora of funding sources out there. Funding sources have varying timelines, requirements, and eligibility rules. A range of funding programs exist to support communities before, during, and after disasters, but navigating these opportunities can be complex and is always time-consuming. We created this Resilient Funding Guide to help these towns understand what kind of resources are available to them and explain how they can take action to claim them and build financial resilience. With the uncertainty of federal funding payouts, these towns must start thinking strategically about debt and alternative funding tools. As previously mentioned, money for disaster recovery can come from a wide variety of sources. We have 3 main sources of funding to focus on this morning: a flood reserve fund, a stormwater utility fee, and municipal bonding. All of these funding sources will live in a capital improvement program. As the impacts of flooding events become stronger and costlier and the instability of federal disaster assistance grows, every dollar available for flood mitigation projects and disaster response becomes more important. Planning for flood resilience requires questioning not just how much, but from where and when funds can be mobilized. Simply put, flexibility and stability of finances are some of the most critical assets in combating uncertainty. Establishing a municipal reserve fund, also known as a stabilization fund or rainy day fund, is a quick and practical way for Dover, Reedsboro, Whitingham, and Wilmington to each hold more agency over their future finances. A reserve fund is an amount of money set aside on an annual basis to fund unexpected expenses or make up for changes in revenue that cannot be supported by general fund appropriations. The good news is that these towns already have reserve funds, so they can and should create a reserve fund for flooding. Reserve funds provide municipalities with 2 major benefits. First, once established by majority vote, it provides a flexible framework to disperse funds for a specified purpose without further voting approval. Second, unlike a normal annual operating budget, it provides municipalities with the means to roll over funding from year to year without having to reallocate. These funds can also be invested, which provides the opportunity for passive fund development over time. That being said, the impact of a reserve fund is only as strong as a town's greater fiscal policy. Towns should comprehensively assess their budgets and look for opportunities to increase revenue sustainability. We have some recommendations for towns on this issue, one of which is a stormwater utility fee. Stormwater runoff is one of the primary causes of flooding and environmental pollution. Development in Vermont communities, both rural and urban, has led to a significant increase in land area covered by impervious surfaces, which amplifies runoff and flooding. Stormwater utility fees generate targeted funding for stormwater management at the municipal level. We recognize that the tax burden is already overbearing on residents. Fee calculation can be targeted at development that has the highest impact, such as new developments and large parcels. Because fees can be proportional to a parcel's impervious surface area, it is a fair source of funding. This system allows property owners to contribute to stormwater management according to their stormwater impacts. The revenue generated can only be used for utility-rated expenses like upgrading drainage systems, developing stormwater plans, covering administrative costs, and installing flood control measures. In many instances, stormwater utility fee programs allow property owners to reduce their fee rate by reducing the area of impervious surfaces or installing mitigation infrastructure on their property. A system like this generates revenue and incentivizes property owners to be mindful of the amount of impervious surface on their land. Even with strong budgeting efforts to grow a municipal reserve fund, the scale of damage from climate events can be unpredictable and can quickly exceed what a municipality can financially absorb. To prepare for long-term financial resilience, municipalities need a clear understanding of how debt works and how debt can be a reliable and responsible tool that allows communities to invest in systems that protect residents, stabilizes local economies, and reduces the cost of long-term disasters. This is where bonding becomes essential. Bonding is a written promise to repay borrowed money at a fixed rate of interest. General obligation bonds are the most common and hold the power to tax residents to pay the bondholder. Bonds allow municipalities to spread large costs over time instead of draining general funds, and creates financial capacity for municipalities to rebuild, upgrade infrastructure, and reduce future risk while keeping annual budgets manageable. There are many requirements that municipalities must be careful in following throughout the bond process. Fortunately, qualified local bond counsel is available to help. Towns can access bond counsel through the Vermont Bond Bank and the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. Bond counsel can guide municipalities through the bond process and provide the validation needed that these municipalities are in a good place to take on debt. This wraps up our three big alternative funding sources: a flood reserve fund, a stormwater utility fee, and municipal bonding. To utilize these funds efficiently, it's important for municipalities to have a capital improvement program. A capital improvement program, or a CIP, is a home for all of your funding sources so they can be organized and more easily allocated towards specific projects. Through a CIP, municipalities can assess revenue, inventory asset conditions, evaluate costs, prioritize projects, identify funding sources, and coordinate the implementation of projects through a structured framework. CIPs are beneficial for enabling flood resiliency, as they allow towns to clearly understand their financial needs so they can make informed decisions about the type and extent of projects to undertake. CIPs would also highlight opportunities for collaboration among towns through shared services and facilities. To assist you in navigating the process, we have provided a step-by-step guide to help you through the planning, implementation, and evaluation processes of a CIP. The first step of a capital improvement program is taking capital inventory, which would identify all physical assets. For example, all town vehicles, public buildings, public services, and more. Taking this kind of inventory allows towns to find redundancies, notable assets between towns, and compare expenditures. This could reveal opportunities for collaboration to share existing assets and save on future expenses. Working as a whole could unlock funding opportunities that may not have been available to individual towns previously. With unfilled town positions, volunteer planning boards, and limited budgets, each town faces a significantly larger challenge and reduced return on investment by approaching the funding and financing of flood resilient projects on their own without organized long-term planning. A CIP offers a strategic way to align the projects you're investing in with your comprehensive plan and long-term vision. Collaboration can reduce costs per municipality, allow for more versatile strategies, and create a more structured list of priorities. The Vermont League of Cities and Towns has a 5-year summary template of a capital improvement plan, which is linked in our deliverable. While it's good to understand how to leverage debt to mitigate and recover from flooding, it's also important to overall have a more proactive financial planning approach as a municipality. Increasing funding capacity for towns will always be helpful. It is the first step for any other action. Funding can be a challenging topic to grasp, but it is an essential thing to understand, especially when it comes to building climate resilience. In an attempt to make funding more approachable, we created a board game called Ready or Not, the Climate Challenge. We designed this game to help participants explore the impact of climate change on communities by having players make their own choices regarding development patterns, funding allocations, shared services, and more in towns of their own. Players see how these choices can influence a town's resilience to various scenarios like flooding, erosion, economic instability, and more. We wanted to make sure the game was fun and replayable, so there are some pretty wild scenarios in there, from a 5th grade science fair gone wrong to the rising fame of a local moose. A key element of this game is the incorporation of money and trade-offs, which helps players understand the financial dimensions of building resilience. Decisions made every round carry costs and benefits and encourages players to think about actual local financing challenges, pros and cons of shared services, and mutual aid agreements. These structures can help illustrate how towns can rely on one another and how resource sharing can strengthen resilience. This game was refined through extensive testing with a diverse range of participants, including high school students, undergraduate students, Amherst Town Council members, and community members from Wilmington. Facilitating the game with these groups allowed us to understand how different audiences engage with the game and helped us create a final product that is accessible, engaging, educational, and fun for all ages and levels of experience in planning and climate resilience. By simulating potential scenarios, this game encourages discussion, collaboration, and actionable insights. The final version of our game, as I encourage you to farther explore in the back of the room if you haven't already, reflects lessons learned from running the game with various groups and is ready to be shared with other communities to be used as a fun tool to foster thoughtful, collaborative planning in the face of climate uncertainty. The maps used in our game are loosely based off the region we've been working in all semester. If you take a look at the board game, you might recognize the curves of the Deerfield River. While a few of our game scenarios are pretty whimsical, our game is based on real strengths and fears that we heard from community members through public engagement activities like the asset and risk mapping activity that Julia mentioned earlier. We invited community members to share some of their local knowledge with us and identify assets and risks in their towns. We found that this was a useful tool to get an on-the-ground perspective from community members, and we have made these materials available to you for future engagement. Throughout our process, public engagement was critical to our work, and we want to encourage you to use some of these tools we developed to collaborate across communities and build relationships. I will now pass it off to Anthony, who will walk us through how we evaluated and prioritized our deliverables, and he will wrap us up. Thank you.
All right. Thank you to Liana, Seth, and Julia for presenting our discussion today. And now that you've heard about our deliverables, we'd like to break down how we've determined the success of our deliverables, as well as our overall recommendations for the Deerfield River Valley. It's been quite the wild adventure for our studio, from finding out who our stakeholders were back in the summer, to preparing for public engagement events, and to finally presenting our recommendations to the communities we've grown to love. Each step of the journey, we've made it our top priority to listen to community voices. The feedback we received acted as the foundation for our deliverables and our 3 tested scenarios. We truly don't know what the future holds for our 4 towns, but we have dedicated our entire mission to helping each town prepare themselves for the future. And that requires adaptable tools that actually work, even though there are many unforeseen and unpredictable circumstances. Based on what we've heard from the 4 towns and from the overview my colleague Julia just gave us today, our 3 scenarios are private paradise, rural regression, and green growth. Earlier, we mentioned how these scenarios were derived from exploring 3 driving forces, which are state and federal funding, state and federal regulations, and demographic shifts. In addition, we are always thinking about climate change and flooding, as our mission has stated. It's important to note that our process is not the prediction of the river's path. Instead, it's our response to the many different drivers that are outside of our control. And it's an exploration of actions that will help us achieve the most resilient communities. The use of exploratory scenario planning allowed us to be more resourceful with our limited time, money, and professional expertise. Let us now look at how the deliverable components reflect the needs we've heard from the Deerfield River Valley throughout the semester. Starting with the Municipal and Regional Capacity Toolkit, we frequently heard that the most common sentiment was a deep love for the natural beauty and a sense of community within Vermont. The kit aims to preserve the community's assets by building land use policies and recommendations that ensure flood resilience is reflected in their town from the top down. And for our community flood-proofing toolkit, a common emotion we heard was a feeling of helplessness, especially when faced with challenges that feel too big to solve. This guide provides residents with resources to protect themselves and their homes from future flooding. And now let's turn to our resilient funding guide, where we heard an overwhelming concern about the uncertainty within funding landscapes and the growing difficulty of securing funds for mitigation projects. This guide introduces funding opportunities to strengthen municipal budgets and help towns invest in flood-ready futures. And finally, our process-based education materials. Some community members are cautious to collaborate with neighboring towns. However, the need to work across the region is a concern we have heard again and again. Our mapping activity creates community connection and regional collaboration in a low-stakes environment. And our board game, The Ready or Not, the Climate Change Challenge, introduces people to the interconnectedness and unpredictability of natural disasters. Let us now move to the research question that directed our prioritization process. Our question reads, what deliverables are we most confident will have a positive impact in various futures? In order to answer the question, we tested the 4 deliverables against our 3 scenarios in order to create a list of specific recommendations that are prioritized by their ability to perform in various futures. Additionally, most of the deliverables require these towns to weigh trade-offs and decide whether or not to invest their time, money, and effort into them. Based on our research, we've heard that these indicators are how community members would measure success in their towns. We split the indicators across 3 different realms: the built, natural, and social environments, as you can see. Then we used each category to determine whether or not the recommended actions will be impactful in any future. After our testing was conducted, we found that the following deliverables, as you can see, are robust and high impact, meaning that they are effective in all 3 scenarios, and that they improve by an average of at least 40% in all of our indicators. As you can see from this table, we wanted to present where our implementations are found, how much it'll cost, and how long it'll take. In the last column, we've noted which actions should be done in tandem so that they can be implemented effectively. As you may have noticed, these are not all of our recommended actions. The deliverables you do not see here are considered contingent, where actions are dependent on multiple uncertain outcomes. Some actions, such as zoning updates, have only 1 or 2 specific benefits, or serve as stepping stones towards a higher impact action. It's important to note that a low score in our testing does not mean that the action is not worth doing. Many of these contingent actions are paired, meaning that they are done in unison or chronologically with other deliverable components. For example, a flood reserve fund may be difficult to implement without a capital improvement program, especially since this action is expensive as well. Some robust and high impact actions will require time and effort to implement and may not yield immediate returns. Doing some of these low-hanging fruit can get the ball rolling and make more significant actions less costly to implement in the long-term future. And with all that being said, let's take a step back and discuss our studio's most valuable lesson this semester. As our speakers have emphasized throughout our presentation, regional collaboration is an essential tool towards ensuring a long-term resilience in the Deerfield River Valley. We recommend that Dover, Whitingham, Wilmington, and Reedsboro adopt a regional mindset to empower their residents in working towards financial sustainability, effective planning, and adaptability in any environment. Our communities can begin strengthening their collective capacity and better support a resilient future by coordinating money, people, and planning at the regional scale across all 4 communities. In addition to the previous slide's recommendations, let's now look at some more small things that the towns can implement tomorrow. 1, consider mutual aid agreements. 2, broaden collaboration to include underrepresented groups. 3, stay in regular communication with essential personnel like highway and emergency response managers. And 4, keep open dialogue with state legislators. Making these long-term decisions in small communities means balancing climate uncertainty with limited capacity. And part of our role was to take on some critical thinking. Our engagement and analysis were designed to give decision makers direct tools so that they can focus on immediate needs without losing sight of the future. This process pushed us to listen and learn continuously, and we're confident the work we've shared reflects what we heard across all 4 towns. Ultimately, our deliverable offers well-informed advice, practical guidance, and templates that can help local leaders move towards a safer and more resilient future. Before we thank our community and open for questions, I wanted to revisit the question that we all posed to you at the beginning of our presentation. What does it mean to live with water? Well, Our answer to this question is a quote from Connor Hawk Cubitt, a representative of the Odanak First Nation, which reads, "When planners consider flooding and resilience, we ask that they consider both these material impacts and the deeper spiritual context. Floods in our teaching shows us that balance will always be restored with or without us." And with that being said, we are determined to finalize our documents by December 17th, which can be found soon on our website, which is located at the deerfieldvalleyrise.com. The website will be our final resting place for all our deliverables, supporting documents, and downloadable community engagement activities. And we encourage you to take a pamphlet in the back and scan the QR code for easy access. Thank you for all listening. And thank you especially to our clients from the Wyndham Regional Commission, Chris Campany and Sue Westa. And another special thank you to our Professor Camille Bargers for always believing in us every step of the way. Also, thank you to Wayne Fiden and everyone from the Resilience of Metro Regions. Also, thank you to the folks from the American Institute of Architects, and the biggest thanks of all to the community members from the Deerfield River Valley, who consistently engage in our project and helped 15 students learn something new. Here's a list of our sources for your review, and now I'll hand the mic over to Grace for our 15-minute Q&A. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you.